If you want to experience something unusually powerful in your life, you may need to add something usual to your life.
Welcome to the podcast with your host, Craig T. Owens. Craig's new book, When Sheep Bite, is coming soon. Now, here's Craig.
Just before Jesus is arrested, he goes to pray on the Mount of Olives. Luke records it this way. It says that Jesus went as usual to his place of prayer. It was his usual activity. In fact, we see that throughout the life of Jesus. It was usual for him to start the day in prayer. Mark chapter 1, verse 35 tells us that. We see that it is the usual activity of Jesus when he has been through an intense time of ministry to replenish himself in prayer. And here in Luke chapter 22, we see that when Jesus is getting ready to face a really intense time of battle, it is usual for him to go to prayer. Prayer was usual for him. And so then as a result, we see this unusual demonstration of God's power through his life. You know, we see the same thing in Daniel. In Daniel chapter 6, a decree has been signed saying that prayer is outlawed now. And Daniel chapter 6 tells us that as usual, Daniel went to his time of prayer. And as a result, the bad guys knew exactly where to catch him. And he was thrown into the lion's den. But then God had an unusual victory here where he closed the lions' mouths. They weren't able to harm Daniel, and he came out unscathed. Well, it's kind of the same thing here with Jesus. John chapter 18, the first two verses tells us that Judas knew where to find Jesus. He knew where the usual place of prayer was, and he led the bad guys there. It was easy for them to catch Jesus because they knew where to find him. Jesus was thrown into his own lion's den of sorts as he faces the horrific treatment and ultimately crucifixion on the cross. But think about the unusual victory, probably the most unusual victory in all of history, as Jesus is raised back to life and showing that he conquers hell, death, and the grave. But you know what, friends, you and I as well, if we will make abiding with Jesus, if we'll make our prayer time the usual activity for our lives, we can begin to experience the unusual power of God in our lives as well. I look at some examples in the life of Jesus. In John chapter 12, Jesus said, not one word that he spoke wasn't a word that he heard his Father speaking first. He said, the Father told me everything I needed to say. In John chapter 5, Jesus also says, everything that you saw me doing, I did it because I saw my Father doing this. We see that at both the beginning of his ministry in Luke chapter 4 and at the end of his ministry as Jesus is praying here in Mount Olives, that he doesn't give in to temptation. He has the unusual strength to stand against temptation. And of course, then we see him praying. He says, Father, is there another way but for me to go through this horrific treatment of crucifixion? And he says, because I need to go through this, you will strengthen me to go through this. It's not what I desire, Father, but what you desire is going to be done. Friends, for you and I as well, if prayer becomes a usual part of our life, we will begin to experience more and more regularly the unusual power of God in our lives. In fact, I would go so far as to say that the unusual will actually become usual. It will be so much of our regular part of our life as we abide with God in prayer and his power is seen in our life. It'll no longer become an unusual thing. It'll become the usual. We will just expect God to give us the word that we need to speak, the action we need to do. He'll give us the power to withstand the temptation that's coming our way. He'll give us the power to stand strong even in our hour of trial. I challenge you, friend, be like Jesus. Make prayer the usual part of your life, and then be ready for the unusual part of power that God is going to pour into you.
Craig's new book, When Sheep Bite, is coming soon. To pre-order, go to craigtowens.com.